Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, November 27th, 2023. That's right. Yeah, 23. And time for another show. We're back from the Thanksgiving break, which for you, if you were listening, and for me, since I was producing them, wasn't that much of a break at all. And maybe, I don't know. Now I've been encouraged. Go ahead. Take your Thanksgiving break. We don't mind. It's okay. Everyone understands. I was just bored at home and had an awful lot of things to read to you. Not that we've made a dent in the backlog any. And as you know, news continues to happen. Humans everywhere throughout the world continue to make news, some of it good, some of it bad, all of it worth sharing, and that's what we're here to do with you today. We'll catch up with a number of developments from over the holidays and over the weekend. Greg Dworkin hasn't been here since Wednesday of last week, which is, you know, about normal because only Thursday was off. So, you know, no big deal. Not that there aren't any big deals happening elsewhere in the world. Lots to catch up on, as I mentioned. Oh, and some stories that that Justice is mentioning that I did not put aside, but just as a measure of how crazy the news is these days that you didn't even put aside things like this. There's a story. I do acknowledge these stories, the existence of these stories. There's something weird. I didn't put it aside because because who cares about Ron DeSantis anymore? But Ron DeSantis had a weird story break late over the weekend about a person working for him in the Florida state government, you know, a person of some note, I guess, who, I don't know, suffered a heart attack, maybe some other things, and died in his office, but that will happen. And it's not anywhere alleged in the story that Ron DeSantis did anything about it, but I mean, it's not alleged anywhere that he did anything about, like, getting a doctor or calling in some officials or saying, hey, a guy has died in my office, and people are going to wonder, why did a guy die in the governor's office? And nobody did anything about it or called anybody. They just kind of let him lay there for a while. It's a very weird story. I don't think we'll be unraveling that story here today, but it's out there, and who knows what's going to happen with it. Ron DeSantis, like an idiot, steps on every rake that there is, and so I imagine it becomes an issue in the coming days. There's also mention of Trump pardons out there. I did see in passing that, again, I think for the second time, somebody that he pardoned for some, yeah, I mean, it was a crime. It was a real crime, and there was just no real reason to pardon the person. It was just somebody I know who knows somebody who gave me money or didn't give me enough money, and now I have to extort them for more money or some arrangement. But again, I think this is at least the second time in which he's pardoned someone and they went straight back out and committed the same crime over again because only the best people, etc., etc. Lots of other things to do. It is Monday. It is allegedly Cyber Monday. I don't know when they're going to get rid of the cyber prefix. I think it's I don't know, and I guess maybe Elon Musk hopes that they don't because he named his truck that, which is ridiculous and about 30 years out of serious usage, I think. But it's Cyber Monday, which means a thing. I guess it was Black Friday on Friday. I didn't do any of the shopping things that you're, supposed to do, I guess, as a good patriotic American or whatever. But if you also stayed at home and said, well, I'll do my shopping online anyway, apparently now is your chance. Cyber Monday, I don't see any particular advantage to it, but I guess there's some deals being offered somewhere on something. I hate shopping. I'm certainly not going to do it on a hyper shopping day. But anyway, good luck to those of you who are going to do that. I am going to drive back to College Town today, as we took college boy number 2 back to school yesterday, only to find about 3/4 of the way through the drive there, gee whiz, I should have brought my wallet with me. Yeah, well, okay, well, that would have been helpful. So, student ID, key card to get in the building, all the things you need to eat food, et cetera, et cetera. So, driving back out there and turn around and come straight back. That's my afternoon. It's an exciting lifestyle we live here at the KITM headquarters. All right, and plenty more where that came from. As it turns out, things happened elsewhere in the world as well. The Israel-Hamas temporary ceasefire, which I think they've landed on the word truce for, because people were fighting over whether or not to call it a ceasefire or whatever else, and they couldn't land on a term. So a truce has been in place for a couple of days. Hostages taken by Hamas from Israel have been released. Prisoners held by Israel who are Palestinian have been released. People are fighting over the terminology there too as well. There are certainly people who say, well, a lot of the people being held by Israel were hostages as well. So there's some merit to that argument as well. But rather than focus on that, we'll focus on what actually happened. And for that purpose, we bring you Greg Dworkin, returning after the long Thanksgiving break, which included an extra day. So, good morning, Greg. How are you?
We're doing all right. My voice is a little better, but I'm going to have to hit that cough button quite frequently during the course of this discussion.
This is a button that makes you cough?
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you
wish.
And
again, I may only last till the half hour, but we'll see what we can do here.
We admire your resolve.
Well,
I mean, yes.
Thank you for your service. Right?
Yes, right. That's it. That's what I meant. Clearly. And now you get 10% off a Chevrolet if you wish.
So, interesting things happened. There's I think the current term of art isn't soccer moms. It's pause.
There's
a pause.
There was a humanitarian pause, and then there was a regular pause.
This is a hostage pause.
Hostage pause. All right. Sure. Why not? I thought that was one of the ones they were debating, but okay.
That there's 10 more hostages to be released. There's another day of pause.
All right.
And so things, despite some glitches and technical issues, it still seems to be going on. And today, the technical issue, which they think they'll work out, is the actual list provided by Hamas of who's supposed to be released. Now,
okay,
part of the problem
it's written in Arabic.
Is that, well, no, they can read Arabic. They can read Hebrew.
I can't.
They can read Chinese. They can do all that stuff. The problem is that Hamas doesn't have all the hostages.
Yeah, I figured that problem would come up.
So, in theory, from Israel's point of view, the pause is good public relations. We'd like to destroy Hamas, but, it's best to delay that for a day or two. But also, it's a strategic opportunity for Hamas to go find them.
Okay.
And that was the argument given to the right-wing folks who just want to, to hell with the hostages. We don't care about them. We don't care about anything except ourselves. We want to destroy Hamas. And they're not particularly popular in Israel right now. The latest polls show that Likud would be decimated if there were an election today.
Let's have one. You could. I mean,
but part of the reason that that's important is other things going on. For example, my Israeli friend Jonathan Tuval tweets, U.S. officials are discussing with their Egyptian, Saudi, and Jordanian counterparts.
All right.
The idea of convening an international conference on the two-state solution as early as December, as Washington comes under heavy pressure to allow a United Nations Security Council resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire. Now, a source tells him, Jonathan, who tells me, that a key point of debate is whether it's worthwhile convening such a conference in the coming weeks with the understanding that Israel would refuse to participate, or whether it's better to wait until a change in leadership in Israel. Which could take several more months, but like everybody thinks is going to happen.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. You want some sort of immediate work to take place, but yeah, if you know who's coming to the table for Israel, is that a waste of time?
Well, yeah, I mean, and Israel won't come to the table with a Likud government.
Oh, well, right.
But the Likud government is doing so badly, it now becomes a possibility. Okay. Now, here's part of the problem. If you want to step back and look at the situation,
I do not.
And say, well, I would like to have a solution to this.
I would like to have.
Not a final solution, a actual, real diplomatic, everybody gets something solution.
Sure, a regular interim solution.
Yeah. The problem is, from non-Israel-Palestine point of view, the best solution would be a two-state solution where each population gets their own country and gets self-governance and self-determination.
That sounds like it would be popular internationally, yes.
But polls say Israelis don't want that and Palestinians don't want that.
Well, who cares about them?
Yeah, who cares about them, exactly. So, imposing a solution from outside would be more than a little bit difficult. So, as difficult as it is to say this, sometimes, and it's not a good thing and it's not something to wish for, but sometimes it takes the pain of reality to make people come to the table.
Yeah.
Again, from Israel's point of view, and we have better reporting on Israel than we do on the Gaza point of view. From Israel's point of view, they feel like the hostage situation only really started to get serious after Israel invaded the northern part of Gaza, and only military pressure helped. And as long as they have that point of view, rightly or wrongly, it's going to be very difficult to have negotiations go any other way. And it's not just Likud and the right-wing crazies in Netanyahu's cabinet who absolutely need to be replaced. But for the most part, the Israeli population doesn't like Likud, thinks Netanyahu is responsible, thinks the hostages and their release and their safety take precedence over destroying Hamas, and Netanyahu and Likud think the opposite, which is why it's so important that so much pressure is being put on them from the United States.
Okay. And we have seen that.
There's two stories, and the headline for my pundit roundup today was Biden's hand clearly seen in the hostage talks. And the first one comes from NBC News, called "The 5 Extremely Excruciating Weeks of Talks That Led to the Hamas." And maybe the whole problem is they think it's Hamas. No, it's Hamas.
That could be it.
Hamas hostage deal. Vast challenges remain in freeing all 240 hostages. Most of all, Hamas is claiming it's not holding roughly 100 of the captives. But in that story, this paragraph jumped out at me. The final agreement, the outlines of which had been on the table for weeks, wouldn't have been accepted by Netanyahu without enormous pressure from Biden, according to a senior Israeli government official.
Okay.
This deal was a Biden deal, not a Netanyahu deal, the official said.
All right, that's easy to believe.
Yeah, so it is very easy to believe. The Washington Post version of this says White House officials contend that Biden's bear hug approach to Israel has given him credibility with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Okay. So that's how he got to negotiate on their behalf.
Yeah, allowing the president to exert the kind of pressure that led to the current hostage deal and fighting pause. U.S. officials are using the pause to urge Israel to make its expected military operation in the south of Gaza, where nearly 2 million Palestinians are concentrated, more targeted and less deadly, according to two senior administration officials. Biden's foreign policy team has long been mindful of the influence of Washington's pro-Israel lobbying organizations, but the changing demographics of key swing states like Michigan,
yes,
home to a growing Arab American community, is prompting some Democratic analysts to question the conventional policy wisdom, which is fine. I think that's good. I think that alternate voices should be heard. And this talks about the fact that younger aides in the White House are bringing up their concern about simply blindly supporting Israel. However, more nuanced commentators are pointing out that that's not really what's going on. For example, Matt Iglesias,
Uh-oh.
had this to say.
Oh, dear.
Right? First, he has the New York Times headline from Thursday, November 23rd. Israel and Hamas agree to begin ceasefire on Friday. Prodded by the U.S., Israel agreed to the pause in hostilities and the release of 150 imprisoned Palestinians in exchange for 50 hostages.
Okay.
Right? Meanwhile, a different report, this looks like the Washington Post on November 22nd,
Something else.
says Biden's resistance to ceasefire could alienate youth voters in 2024. As the death toll rises in the Middle East, some young U.S. voters dissatisfied with Biden's response are considering third-party voters sitting it out. And Iglesias posted both of these things and says, to me, actually brokering a ceasefire agreement is more impressive than calling for or demanding a ceasefire. But,
Okay.
respect.
All right, I can see why that might be an issue for him, sure.
And Sahil Kapoor, a more neutral reporter rather than pundit, says, this is a common mode of operating for Biden. He prefers to try to get a result rather than win the news cycle with sound bites, which can be counterproductive to policy success. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's a viable governing method, and that's what he does. Mm-hmm. A parallel example is Build Back Better. Dems were furious when Manchin walked away from it. Some wanted more outrage from Biden. Some wanted punishment. He held his fire, stayed the course, and got Inflation Reduction Act. So you got a big climate change win instead of revenge and venting. That's what it does. Okay.
Yeah, I can see that being the case. And I'd prefer to certainly view this situation that way. It makes a lot of sense, and it's something we've discussed before, not just about him, but that's kind of the role of the president to say, sometimes I will just draw all the fire. If that thing is going to get done, that's okay with me.
So he's a diplomat. He's a policy wonk. He gets a lot done. And, I had pointed out that if you're going to look at the people online, which you shouldn't, by the way, because most of them are either paid trolls or performative. Look at me. I'm an influencer. I get paid for this. I will never vote for Biden. Did you ever vote for Biden? I think that Biden needs to stand out there and demand a ceasefire. Well, okay, but he's doing all of this stuff. Well, yeah, but he's old.
Yeah.
Well, isn't he doing the things you claim that he ought to be doing? If only Biden would propose popular things, he wouldn't be in the doldrums in polling. What popular things? Well, stuff. Yeah. Like what specifically? You're talking about forgiving student loans. You're talking about trying to give child tax credits. Are you talking about things that he has proposed and tried to pass and have been blocked by the Republicans? Is that what you're talking about? Or is this a world where you think making demands is what you're supposed to do, but actually getting it through Congress, both houses, is really not on your radar because you don't know how that works and you don't listen to the show?
Yeah.
If you did, you'd at least know how Congress works and how difficult it is to get anything done.
Yeah. Well,
speaking of which, by the way, I should point out before I forget.
Okay.
And you'll correct me on this. You're the expert. I'm not.
I might forget.
Tomorrow at noon, the House reconvenes.
Okay. So far, correct, I think.
All right. But there's there's sort of a tradition. There's sort of a way of convening this, which is based on tradition and ceremony.
Oh, okay.
The first thing that happens is, or again, I could get the order wrong, but basically the first thing that happens is that a temporary speaker of the day is appointed. So there's a speaker pro tempore because you don't really see the speaker generally ruling the House.
He's busy.
Right? So it's Mr. Speaker, but it's not the Speaker.
Right.
And then after that is the benediction and then the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, yeah. Normal procedure.
Somewhere in there is the presentation of the Speaker's journal, which is a chronicle of what happened in the last session for official records.
Oh, okay. Yes. Right. The journal is approved usually. It's like minutes from the meeting.
Right. So those are the first things that happen in any session.
Right.
And akin to that, and along with protocol, procedure, and tradition, somebody will introduce a motion to expel George Santos.
Oh, well, that's new.
Well, no, it happens all the time.
Traditionally.
That's my point. It's all part of the tradition of pomp and circumstance.
Is that right? It's now become a traditional part of the
and so that'll
opening?
happen tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Well, I thought that was a new
But
thing.
in that order. I mean, first you have to appoint the speaker, then
Right,
you
he
have
has
to
to be
have
the one
the
that
benediction, then the pledge, and the
course.
speaker's journal, and then you expel George Santos. I mean, they'll be doing that every day for the next 30 years.
All right. Even when he's gone.
Yeah.
Just for the hell of it. All right. Well, I didn't realize that they were doing
Well,
it
it's
that
tradition
often,
and
but sure.
precedent, right?
It is. I guess it is now.
It's a body that really cares about such things, except when they don't.
Right. Well, you can't move for his expulsion any sooner than that. All those other things have to be done in order to make sure that the body you've convened is, in fact, the House of Representatives.
Yeah. So, when somebody from New York says, I'm going to immediately, first thing, expel George Santos. Well, no, you're not. First, these other things have to happen.
Right.
And
Yeah,
then
why
it's
do you
a
hate the Pledge
privileged
of Allegiance?
motion, and then, there's 48 hours or something. I don't even remember the rules anymore.
Oh, right.
I should. They've tried to expel him so often. But
Yes.
that's really going to be one of the first orders of business.
I guess so. Yeah, and a privileged resolution provided. Well, you propose your resolution and ask that it be recognized as privileged, and the chair has. The chair has a certain amount of time, and it may be 48 hours, to rule on whether or not it's privileged, which they can just jump straight out and say, yeah, it is, if they want to. And then you have, I think, 24 hours or so, once it's ruled as privileged, to bring it to the floor for an hour debate.
Right. But now that they have a speaker, and in that sense they don't need his vote because they're basically conceding they can't do anything anyway, the speaker's okay with this.
All right.
At least he said so publicly.
Yeah, it's hard to oppose it. He can
Well, a
oppose
majority
the,
of the majority
the expulsion.
don't want him out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then you remember that was the rule from the guy who was really into following all the rules, Hastert.
Right. So part of the reason that they want him out is it's hurting them electorally.
Oh. Yeah. Well, he's stealing all this money, and he's crazy.
And Santos said, I'm not going
That's
quietly.
like Trump.
I will not go gentle into this good night. If you try to get rid of me,
Yeah.
if you go for expulsion, first of all, I'll fight it tooth and nail. And
Can
secondly,
you?
I'll tell you every single thing my fellow Congress people have done that's wrong. I'll tell you the names
Good.
and dates of the ones who went to vote drunk. I'll tell you the names and dates of who's having an affair with whom.
All right.
I'll spill all of it if you do this.
Wow. What if that
And
happened?
I'm thinking, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
This is a twofer.
Okay. No, don't do it. Okay. Well, he learned all of that in a year in Congress, so it just tells you a little bit about how open.
Yeah,
some
he's
of
as
this
fast
stuff
a
is.
study as Tommy Tuberville. That is
Yeah.
to say, somebody's doing this for him. He's
Okay.
got that, secretary / staffer that Jimmy Stewart had.
All right. I advise you not to do it, George. Save it for the book so that you have a way of making money when they throw you out of Congress. You know how it is with news these days. Don't break it. Write it in a book.
Anyway, back to the topic we were discussing in terms of Biden
That
and
one.
trying to arrange stuff
Oh, okay.
with Israel. David Darmerfeld retweeted with a gift link that White House story from the Washington Post
Okay. Oh, nice gift. It's gift giving season.
and says it tells how POTUS got Netanyahu to reduce the number of troops Israel sent into Gaza by 2/3, how the vice president has been a voice for fighting Islamophobia, getting Biden to talk about that as well, and how the administration has been pushing back on anti-Semitism from the far left, which is a thing and absolutely exists.
Okay.
And, the far left,
how far?
which isn't really the Democratic Party, is starting to remind me of tankies. If you remember tankies.
Yeah.
They go back to the Soviet Union and Czechoslovakia and Hungary before that. And Soviet Union can do no wrong.
Well, they can't do anything now, but
Even when they're sending in tanks. So that's why they're called tankies.
I got it.
So how do you know that they're on that side of the Jeremy Corbyn dividing line? When they refuse to say what Hamas did was terrorism, that it was bad to rape people and, behead people and steal babies. If you can't say that's bad, you're a tankie.
Yes. Right.
That's completely and totally different than taking a pro-Palestinian position, because Hamas does not equal Palestinians.
Well, that's true too.
So, the inability of some on the far left to be able to do that is basically just marginalize themselves. The reason I bring this up is because what you'll see frequently online are paid trolls who will say things like,
that's important to note.
I would have voted for Biden except for this thing that happened, and now I can't.
Ah.
Well, did you vote for Biden before? I don't know. I'm from Kazakhstan. I can't vote in the United States. Right. And then you look at this. No, well, they're bringing up a point, and you don't understand how people really feel offline. Just look at the people at these demonstrations and so on and so forth. And you roll your eyes and say, okay, tankies think that if people go to a demonstration or a rally, ask Al Gore about rally size, that makes you win. Ryan Burge, for example, says, and he's somebody who studies religion and other things, and he's looking at the religious composition of the Democratic coalition, but in the process of doing that says, look, this is not to denigrate Muslims in any way, but there just aren't that many of them in the electorate.
Okay.
Right? They represent 7-8% of the electorate.
I mean, okay, it's not a huge number, but
less than 1% of white voters were
important.
Muslim in 2020.
Oh.
Switching the votes of 5% of white Catholics would have a much bigger consequence on the election.
Well, all right.
And you should say, well,
are we
just
doing
look
that?
at facts, to just keep in mind when they say, oh, well, you've lost Michigan. No, you haven't, actually.
No. Yeah, well, that's the threat, because that's where there's a large concentration, but
even there,
it may be that they don't control Michigan.
No.
Okay. Important to know.
Just a matter of numbers.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, let's see, where are we with all this? All right, well, I'll make apologies for Greg. The voice, just about failing him, or the voice was holding up, but just the cold was getting the better of him. So, okay, no problem. We can wait until Wednesday to follow up again. Hope you're feeling better by then, but I appreciate your struggling, though you had to do, making it through the first segment. Definitely appreciate it. I've done that, and I think that day is coming again shortly, as some of the various production staff members here at the headquarters are coming down with colds as well. I anticipate that I will get it shortly, and we'll see what kind of impact it has on our ability to continue with the show. All right, but Greg has passed me some notes in class that I can read to you. to further fill in the picture here that he was illustrating when he was on his way out the door. Okay, let's see. Oh, and there was something else that he sent at the end and said, oh, this is important too, but it was on Twitter, and apparently it's been, I don't know. I've been locked out of it at some point. Maybe the guy who originally sent it locked his account, probably because he said something and everybody piled on him and got angry about it. All right, let's see. So let's see. He sent me a screenshot of what it had said. Oh, it was about Israel. So of course that will create some controversy. It was who? Brent Peabody? How does he say it? I don't know. Who had said the single biggest obstacles to peace are Hamas and Islamic Jihad, but Netanyahu isn't helping either. This is a very positive development. What is that development? It is the news that support for Israel's hard right is cratering. Anti-Netanyahu parties are surging. Netanyahu's Likud is down to 18 seats, down from 32. And religious Zionist party is below the electoral threshold. They would not have any seats at all in the next Knesset, I guess, if the election were held today. However, the center-left Labor is too, wasting, I don't know what, 100,000 something, liberal somethings, I don't know what, because the text of that one gets cut off. But you get the idea. So some reactionary voting in Israel that may change the equation for Netanyahu after all. Finally, which is fine, and we should be pleased with that. Okay. Where Greg might have spent his second segment is on this Atlantic article, which impressed him greatly, and I believe, I opened it up, and this way we're able to at least tell who the author actually is. Peter Wehner, Wehner, who writes, have you listened lately to what Trump is saying? And I have, so this should be extra interesting. He is becoming frighteningly clear about what he wants. So, all right, let's all frighten ourselves. I think we're up to date with this story, but it is such a story, and it really requires repeating because, all we did for the first couple of days, we read the thing and said, how come nobody's reacting to this? Well, now people are reacting to it, and this is what it takes to really hammer the point home with the wider populace that doesn't keep up to date every day, every second with what's going on. You just need to repeat this stuff over and over again. That's the way it works. Greg repeatedly tells us that. And so we'll do the same here. Okay. Let's see. Oh, he sent me one more update just to make sure that I understood exactly what it was, in fact, saying in his tweets about Israel. We had it right, in case you were wondering. All right. So what about here in the United States? Because that's where we live. This November 22nd piece in The Atlantic reminds you that you should be listening closely to Trump and believing it when he says he wants to do away with all rule of law for his personal advancement. In 2019, Kennedy Ndahiro, maybe? Ndahiro, the editor of the Rwandan daily newspaper The New Times, explained to readers of The Atlantic how years of cultivated hatred had led to death on a horrifying scale there in Rwanda. In Rwanda, he wrote, we know what can happen when political leaders and media outlets single out certain groups of people as less than human. Ndahiro, I hope I'm close, even in the same universe on the pronunciation there, pointed out that in 1959, Joseph Habyarimana Gitera, an influential political figure with the largest ethnic group in Rwanda, the Hutus, had openly called for the elimination of the Tutsi, the second largest of Rwanda's ethnic groups. Gitera referred to the Tutsi as, quote, you'll recognize this, vermin. The stigmatization and dehumanization of the Tutsi had begun, Ndahiro wrote. It culminated in a 100-day stretch in 1994, and I think now we all remember what this is about, when an estimated 1 million people were killed, the majority of whom were Tutsi. The worst kind of hatred had been unleashed, Ndahiro wrote. What began with dehumanizing words ended in bloodshed. I thought about the events that led up to the Rwandan genocide after I heard Donald Trump in a Veterans Day speech refer to those he counts as his enemies as vermin. We pledge to you, you'll recall that he said, that we will root out the communist, Marxist, fascists, and radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country, that lie and steal and cheat on elections, Trump said toward the end of his speech in Claremont, New Hampshire. They'll do anything, whether legally or illegally, to destroy America and to destroy the American dream. The former president continued, the threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within. Our threat is from within. When Trump finished his speech, the audience erupted in applause, we are told. All right, let's see if we can continue on with the reading of this via Pocket, on account of having read and enjoyed too many articles from The Atlantic so far this month, although it is almost the end of the month. And so what does that mean? It means, of course, that we ought to be subscribing to The Atlantic and supporting such journalism, and maybe one day in the future that will happen. In the meantime, we limit things to the New York Times and the Washington Post, even though many would have us unsubscribe to those and move our money elsewhere. All right, where were we? Trump finished his speech. Audience erupted in applause. Trump's comments came only a few weeks after he had been asked about immigration and the southern border in an interview with the host of a right-wing website. Did you ever think you would see this level of American carnage? Trump was asked. Well, of course, he'll say no, but of course, that was the theme of his inaugural speech, was American carnage. So, whatever. I don't know. The interviewer clearly wanted to hear the answer be no, so he said it was no. No, nobody has ever seen anything like this, Trump responded. I think you could say worldwide. I think you could go to a banana republic and pick the worst one, and you're not going to see what we're witnessing now. The frontrunner for the Republican nomination warned that immigrants pose an immediate threat. We know they come from prisons. We know they come from mental institutions, because I've been there, and insane asylums. We know they're terrorists. We don't know anything of the sort. Nobody has ever seen anything like we're witnessing right now. I can't even continue with the voice. It is a very sad thing for our country. It's poisoning the blood of our country. In a September 20th speech in Dubuque, Iowa, Trump said, what they're doing to our country, they're destroying it. It's the blood of our country. What they're doing is destroying our country. What they're doing is destroying. What they're doing is destroying. What they are doing is destroying our country. He says it 18 times. Trump's rhetoric is a permission slip for his supporters to dehumanize others, just as he does. He portrays others as existential threats determined to destroy everything MAGA world loves about America. Too bad. That's the stuff that sucks. Trump is doing two things at once, pushing the narrative that his enemies must be defeated, while dissolving the natural inhibitions most human beings have against hating and harming others. It signals to his supporters that any means to vanquish the other side is legitimate. The normal constraints that govern human interaction no longer apply. As we put it, of course, every Republican accusation is a confession. So there you go. Dehumanizers view their targets as having a human appearance, but a subhuman essence, according to David Livingstone Smith, a philosophy professor who has written on the history and complicated psychological roots of dehumanization. It is the dehumanizer's nagging awareness of the other's humanity that gives dehumanization its distinctive psychological flavor, he writes. Ironically, it is our inability to regard other people as nothing but animals that leads to unimaginable cruelty and destructiveness. Dehumanized people can be turned into something worse than animals. They can be turned into monsters. They aren't just dangerous, they are metaphysically threatening. They are not just subhuman, they are irredeemably destructive. That is the wickedly shrewd rhetorical and psychological game that Trump is playing, and he plays it very well. Alone among American politicians, he has an intuitive sense of how to inflame detestations and resentments within his supporters while also deepening their loyalty to him, even their reverence for him. Trump's opponents, including the press, are truly the enemy of the people. That's his quote. Of course, he demanded that the parent company of MSNBC and NBC be investigated for, quote, treason over what he described as, quote, one-sided and vicious coverage. He insinuated on the social network Truth Social that the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, deserved to be executed for committing treason. At a Trump event in Iowa, days after that post, one Trump supporter asked why Milley wasn't, quote, in there before a firing squad within a month. And the answer is because it doesn't work that way and you're not the president. But even if you were the president, it should not work that way. But if you don't care about laws, then sure, fine, whatever. Another told NBC News, treason is treason. There's only one cure for treason. That's not a cure, but it's a remedy, but not a cure. Being put to death. Trump has taken to mocking the violent attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband, which left him with a fractured skull that required surgery and other serious injuries. Special counsel Jack Smith, who has brought 2 indictments against the former president, is a, quote, Trump-hating prosecutor who is, quote, deranged and, quote, again, a disgrace to America, and whose wife and family despise me much more than he does. The former president posted the name, photo, and private Instagram account of a law clerk serving Judge Arthur Engoron, who is currently presiding over Trump's civil fraud trial and whom Trump despises and has repeatedly attacked, describing him as crazy and crazed in his hatred of me. Trump later deleted the Truth Social post targeting the law clerk, whom he called a Trump-hating clerk, but not until after it had been widely disseminated. He's coming up with a lot of new terms like Trump-hating this thing and Trump-hating that thing. Very creative. And in his first rally of his 2024 campaign held in Waco, Texas, Trump lent his voice to a recording of the January 6th prison choir, which is made up of men who were imprisoned for their part in the riot at the United States Capitol, of a choir, on January 6th. Okay, the song, Justice for All, features Trump reciting a Pledge of Allegiance mixed with a rendition of the national anthem. Our people love those people, Trump said at the rally. Speaking of those who were jailed, what's happening in that prison, it's a hellhole. These are people that shouldn't have been there. They shouldn't have been at the Capitol is what happened. The Washington Post identified 5 of the roughly 15 men who are featured in the video. 4 of them were charged with assaulting police using weapons such as a crowbar, sticks, and chemical spray, including against Officer Brian Sicknick, who died the next day. At the Waco rally, Trump declared, I am your warrior. I can hardly walk, but I am. I am your justice, he added, for those who have been wronged and betrayed, of which there are many people out there that have been wronged and betrayed. I am your retribution. I love that he has to ad-lib and take all the poetry out of it, right? It should be, for those who have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution. Direct. But for those who have been wronged and betrayed, Trump style, of which there are many people out there that have been wronged and betrayed. I am your retribution. He lost his place on the teleprompter. Trump has described 2024 as our final battle. He means it. So do tens of millions of his supporters. I would mean it too if they did what they should have done with him on January 7th, 2021. We could make it his final battle. That's possible. Trump's rhetoric is clearly fascistic. These days, Trump is being much more overt about becoming an authoritarian and transforming America into some version of autocracy. Ruth Ben-Ghiat, a historian at NYU, told PBS NewsHour, that doesn't mean that if Trump were elected president in 2024, America would become a fascistic state, but it might. Thanks for that warning. That was useless. Our institutions may be strong enough to resist him, though it's an open question. But Trump can do many things short of imposing fascism that can do grave harm to America. Trump, after all, has been impeached twice, indicted 4 times on 91 counts, and found liable for sexual abuse and defamation. Actually, that's something of a non sequitur to this, but okay. It's important to know, but okay. Can Trump do many things short of fascism that can do grave harm to America? Yes. After all, he's been impeached twice. That's the most non sequitur of all of them, really. Yeah, he has been impeached twice. And I think maybe a better point would be he's been impeached twice and been, basically caught red-handed both times. And yet his party simply refused to use the remedy of impeachment against him. So yes, he can do far worse things because no one will hold him to account. All right. Courts in New York have found that he or his companies have committed bank fraud, insurance fraud, tax fraud, and charity fraud. Trump tried to overturn the 2020 election. He was the catalyzing figure that led to a violent attack on the Capitol, and he has argued for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. But for no reason. In our nation's history, according to former Vice President Dick Cheney, as if he knew anything about this, who served in 4 Republican administrations and was part of the Republican leadership of the House, there has never been an individual who was a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump, unless it was him. That Trump would say what he's said and done what he's done is no surprise. He's a profoundly damaged human being, emotionally and psychologically, and physically. Why not? Throw that in there as well. And he's been entirely transparent about who he is. The most troubling aspect of this whole troubling drama has been the people in the Republican Party who, though they know better, have accommodated themselves to Trump's corruptions time after time. Some cheer him on. Others silently go along for the ride. A few gently criticize him and then quickly change topics, but they never leave him. By now, I know how this plays out. For most Republicans to acknowledge, to others and even to themselves, what Trump truly is and still stay loyal to him would create enormous cognitive dissonance. Their minds won't allow them to go there. Instead, they find ways to ease the inner conflict, and so they embrace conspiracy theories to support what they desperately want to believe. For example, that the election was stolen, or that the investigation into Russian ties to the 2016 Trump campaign was a hoax, or that Joe Biden has committed impeachable offenses. They indulge in whataboutism and catastrophism, the belief that society is on the edge of collapse, to justify their support for Trump. They have a burning psychological need to rationalize why, in this moment in history, the ends justify the means. As one Trump supporter put it in an email to me earlier this month, Trump is decidedly not good and decent, but he added, good and decent isn't getting us very far politically, and we've tried good and decent, but at the ballot box that doesn't work. We need to try another way. This sentiment is one I've heard many times before. In 2016, during the Republican primaries, a person I had known for many years through church wrote to me, I think we have likely slipped past the point of no return as a country, and I am desperately hoping for a leader who can turn us around. I have no hope that one of the establishment guys would do that. That, I believe, is what opens people up to Trump. He's all the bad things you say, but what has the Republican establishment given me in the past 16 years? First and foremost, BHO, they using a derogatory acronym. Is that derogatory? Those are his initials for Barack Obama. That is meant to highlight his middle name, Hussein. If I had told this individual in 2016 what Trump would say and do over the next 8 years, I'm confident he would have laughed it off, dismissing it as Trump derangement syndrome. And then he would have assured me that if Trump did do all these things, then of course he would break with him. Yet here we are. Despite Trump's well-documented depravity, he still has a vice grip on the GOP. He carried 94% of the Republican vote in 2020, an increase from 2016, and he's leading the closest primary challenger nationally by more than 45 points. White evangelical Protestants are among the Republican Party's most loyal constituencies, and in 2020, according to the Pew Research Center, more than 8 in 10 white evangelical Protestant voters who frequently attend religious services voted for Trump, as had 81% of those who attend less frequently. That's an increase over 2016. Trump's support among white evangelicals is still extremely high. 81% hold a favorable view of him, according to a poll taken in June after Trump was indicted for a second time. The evangelical movement in America has been reshaped by the sensibilities of Trump and MAGA world. For example, in one survey, nearly 1/3 of white evangelicals expressed support for the statement, because things have gotten so far off track, true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save the country. It is a rather remarkable indictment of those who claim to be followers of Jesus, that they would continue to show fealty to a man whose cruel ethic has always been antithetical to Jesus's and becomes more so every day. Many of the same people who celebrate Christianity's contributions to civilization, championing the belief that every human being has inherent rights and dignity, celebrating the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount and the parable of the Good Samaritan, and pointing to a transcendent order of justice and hope that stands above politics, in the words of my late friend Michael Gerson. continue to stand foursquare behind a man who uses words that echo Mein Kampf. It doesn't have to be this way. Taking a stand for conscience, even long after one should have, is always the right thing to do. When we engage in dehumanizing rhetoric and promote dehumanizing images, the best-selling author Brené Brown has written, we diminish our own humanity in the process. We are called to find the face of God in everyone we meet, she says, including those with whom we most deeply disagree. When we desecrate their divinity, we desecrate our own and we betray our humanity. Far too many Christians in America are not only betraying their humanity, they are betraying the Lord they claim to love and serve. Well, gee whiz, I can't believe it. Some Christians are hypocrites. That's crazy. Well, all right. We've reached the end of the article here. It's always worth repeating that what Trump is doing and saying is extraordinarily dangerous, and we can try and find 10, 15, 20 different ways of saying it every chance we get, in the hopes that someone new will hear it or it will resonate in a different way with the people hearing it for the first time, or just hearing it expressed differently somehow will help them along. What else did Greg send our way here? There was Trump lashing out at the Atlantic after having read that article. So I guess that's news in itself, and that's why we have to report the article at a minimum, just to let people know what is he crying about now. And the answer, the answer is that article. The crying, I guess, is summarized here by Alex Griffing for Mediaite. Trump lashes out at the Atlantic after a brutal article details his recent rhetoric, frighteningly clear about what he wants. Why did the Atlantic one come to his attention and not every other one that we've read? Oh, not sure. But former President Donald Trump took aim at the Atlantic on Saturday and personally attacked its owner, because that's who he thinks is behind the whole thing, Lawrence Powell Jobs. It's so good to see how badly the, all caps, third-rate magazine, The Atlantic, is doing, Trump said short after the storied publication. It's falling at a level seldom seen before, even in the publishing business. False and fake stories do it every time. They've got a rich person funding the ridiculous losses, but at some point, rich people get smart also. Steve Jobs would not be proud of his wife, Laureen. Okay, is that who's... Okay. And the way she is spending his money. The radical left is destroying America. So, typical fare for Trump. I don't know. I don't know how much of it is newsworthy, but this is what he's been up to, and you should know it. Powell Jobs, the Atlantic's publisher and majority owner, is the widow of Apple founder Steve Jobs and has found herself in Trump's crosshairs before. All right. Steve Jobs would not be happy that his wife is wasting money he left her on a failing radical left magazine that's run by a con man, parentheses, Goldberg, and spews fake news and hate. Call her, write her, let her know how you feel. Trump tweeted in September of 2020, urging his followers to get in touch. Trump's first jab at Powell Jobs came after the magazine editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg published a piece titled, Trump, Americans Who Died in War Are Losers and Suckers. You remember that one? In that article, Goldberg laid out in devastating detail Trump's disgust with U.S. military veterans who were killed or injured fighting for their country. The article was later confirmed by former Trump Chief of Staff John Kelly, who was Goldberg's source for the story and whose own son was killed in battle. Trump's most recent jab comes days after Peter Wehner wrote a piece titled, Have You Listened to Trump Lately and What He's Saying? We just, of course, listened to what Peter said Trump was saying in that article, which ran with a subtle subtitle warning he is becoming frighteningly clear about what he wants. Wehner argues that Trump's recent rhetoric and threats made against his fellow Americans are not only undemocratic but also anti-Christian. So he felt the need to weigh in and say, they're all a bunch of lying losers and we don't like the way they're spending their private money, even though something, blah, blah, blah. That's actually the platform on which we normally run for office. You get the idea. Okay. It's a little ridiculous. I don't know what else I can tell you. All right, let's see. Other stories. Maybe we'll see if we can sneak this one in before the break. Just for the every Republican accusation is a confession file. This one from where? We're reading the Sioux City Journal. Okay, and it's been updated. It tells us in the headline, Taylor, not Taylor Swift, as someone on the social media told me they thought I was talking about Taylor Swift when I retweeted this article. Taylor found guilty on all 52 counts of voter fraud. Can you believe it? One guess, and one guess only. What party is Taylor from? That's right. You got it right. Okay. Here's the news. With verdicts for 52 charges marked in a thick packet before him, Chief U.S. District Judge Leonard Strand could have announced the verdict for each charge one by one. Instead, he shortened the suspense, telling those gathered in the courtroom to hear the verdict in Kim Taylor's voter fraud trial, that he'd summarize the jury's decision. It didn't take long. After roughly 6 hours of deliberations, the jury on Tuesday found Taylor, the wife of Republican Woodbury County Supervisor Jeremy Taylor, guilty on all 52 charges. 26 counts of providing false information in registering and voting, 3 counts of fraudulent registration, and 23 counts of fraudulent voting. What happened here? During the 2020 primary and general elections, Taylor, a Vietnam native, approached numerous Vietnamese voters with limited English comprehension and filled out and signed election forms and ballots on behalf of them, on their behalf, I might say, and their English-speaking children. I don't know why they allowed that. It was all part of a scheme, government prosecutors said throughout the 6-day trial, to stuff the ballot box for her husband, who ran unsuccessfully anyway for the Republican nomination for a U.S. House seat in the 2020 primary before winning election to the Woodbury County Board of Supervisors that fall. No one testified to seeing Kim Taylor personally sign any of the documents, but her presence in each voter's home when the forms were filled out was the common thread through the case. We were definitely confident in the evidence we put forward. We were delighted, to say the least. Assistant U.S. Attorney Ron Timmons, one of the 3 prosecutors who presented the federal government's case, said of the verdict, Jeremy Taylor, who met his wife while teaching in Vietnam, has not been charged, but he has been named as an unindicted co-conspirator. The case remains under investigation, so I guess it could yet ensnare Jeremy Taylor himself as well, and Timmons said he couldn't comment on any potential future indictments. Kim and Jeremy Taylor, neither of whom showed a visible reaction upon hearing the verdict, quickly left the courthouse afterward. Now is a time for empathy for a family that's suffering, Kim Taylor's attorney, F. Montgomery Brown, and you really should F that guy, said, this is how we resolve controversies in America, with a jury, not with violence. We respect the jury's verdict and appreciate the jury's service. We'll move on to sentencing and try to get the best outcome at sentencing and assess any appellate decisions after sentencing. Well, that's the way it works. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. There's a little bit more to that article, but what a story, too. So he has ended up on the County Board of Supervisors there in Iowa, but the aim was to get him into Congress in 2020, of course. That really would have been something for him to show up in Congress on January 3rd of 2021 and then turn around and insist that Donald Trump had been cheated out of election by voter fraud, having arrived at Congress through voter fraud, except it didn't work. They didn't do enough voter fraud for it to make a big enough difference, I guess. And he lost the primary. But he did end up in elective office nonetheless, just on a local level. So Kim Taylor, his wife, faces up to 5 years in prison on each charge. And remember, there were 50-something charges. Prosecutors, this is interesting, did not request that she be detained. So Strand ordered that she will remain free on release until sentencing. Somebody who should be facing a sentence of, several hundred years in jail. So, well, whatever. You just come on back when it's time to send you to jail and it'll be fine. Anyway, that's what they did. Sentencing will be scheduled after the U.S. Probation Office completes a pre-sentence investigation. She was ordered to surrender her passport at the time of her arrest and prohibited from applying for a new one. She has 14 days to file a request for a new trial. Brown likely will renew his motion for a judgment of acquittal. Sure, why not? And Strand, who previously reserved ruling on it, asked Brown and the prosecution to file written briefs on the matter. Taylor committed fraud on a scale rarely seen, prosecutors said. Most voter fraud cases involve one voter casting a single ballot in another person's name, said Assistant U.S. Attorney Richard Evans, who helped prosecute Taylor's case. Despite what's in the media, voter fraud is extremely rare, Evans said. To have someone who votes dozens of times for several people, that is rare. Woodbury County election officials became aware of possible voter fraud in September of 2020 when 2 Iowa State University students from Sioux City requested absentee ballots, only to learn ballots had already been cast in their name. They were allowed to withdraw those ballots and cast their own, but Woodbury County Auditor Pat Gill, who's also an election commissioner, kept the fraudulent ballots. When processing absentee ballots on election night, election workers notified Gill the handwriting on a number of them appeared to be similar. After the election, Gill notified the FBI, which launched an investigation. Taylor was indicted and arrested in January. At trial, 5 voters who had immigrated from Vietnam and speak very little English testified through a translator that Taylor had frequently visited their homes to help them fill out voter registration forms, absentee request forms, and absentee ballots for them, and told them they could complete and sign forms for their children without their consent. One man said he'd hand over all the blank forms to Taylor, who would leave with them. 8 young adults, this is like the second time that we've found somebody convicted in court of doing this on behalf of Republicans, oddly enough. 8 young adults, the sons and daughters and granddaughter of those 5 witnesses, who were all born in Sioux City and speak English, each testified they had never given consent for their parents to fill out election forms for them, and all were unaware they had done so. Many of them said they had never voted. In one case, 2 of the men hadn't lived in Sioux City for several years, yet voter registration forms, absentee requests, and ballots bearing their mother's Sioux City address were filed in their names. None of the witnesses, however, ever saw Taylor, who did not testify at trial, sign any of the documents, they said, when Brown cross-examined them for the defense. In his closing argument to the jury, Brown said the government had presented no evidence of Taylor's guilt and that the FBI hadn't bothered to have the handwriting experts examine the documents to determine if Taylor had indeed signed them. The government countered that Taylor had met with all of the families who testified, had helped them fill out the papers, collected them, and dropped them off at the courthouse to be processed. The evidence pointed in the direction of Kim Taylor, Timmons said. All right, so that's where it stands. She now appeals, and we'll see how long that lasts. But like I said, file it under every Republican accusation is a confession. The file is getting large. We'll have to find somewhere off-site to start storing these things. It's getting out of control. All right, let's see. Other things to share with you. There are many. Let's see. There's certainly a couple of things that I had prior to the Thanksgiving holiday here are some that I thought we might read during those 2 days, but that we didn't get to. Here's one that I had put away, and then I also got this one sent to me. My brother Mark sent this one, found it very interesting. Total shift here, I guess. Although, we've been speaking about Trump, and no one is really sure whether Donald Trump is among the super rich anymore. But he certainly behaves like someone who thinks he is, even if he's stealing money to put on a show day to day. But it's a broader category than just him. But of some interest, a opinion piece in the New York Times from November 19th. What happens when the super rich are this selfish? How selfish? Well, about as selfish as we always see, pretty much illustrated every day. It isn't pretty, is the end of the headline here. And it is Guido Alfani, an economic history professor at Bocconi, how did I say this with two C's? Bocconi, maybe, University in Milan. Don't get upset. We don't, we got the name right. Guido Alfani, I think. At least that was easy to pronounce for me. All right, here's the piece. Throughout much of the Western world's history, and he's in Milan, that's Western world. It's east of us, but Western world. The wealthiest have been viewed in their communities as a potentially harmful presence. And they have attempted to allay this sentiment by using their riches to support their societies in times of crisis, like plagues, famines, and wars, and even absent a crisis. But, philanthropy. You do good works, and when it comes to taking care of crises, like he's describing here, that comes closer to the old world notion of a sort of noblesse oblige, right? Is that pronounced correctly? I don't remember. But you remember the concept that it was up to these societal leaders, these wealthy patrons of the arts and society in general, to step up and take care of these things because they could, and because, of course, preserving the status quo is to their benefit. That, too, will certainly factored into things. This symbiotic relationship no longer exists. Today's rich, their wealth largely preserved through the Great Recession and the COVID-19 pandemic, have opposed reforms aimed at tapping their resources to fund mitigation policies of all kinds. This is an historically exceptional development. Helping foot the bill of major crises has long been the main social function attributed to the rich by Western culture. I guess the reason why you allow them to amass that kind of wealth is they tend to give it back, or parts of it back anyway, in times of crisis. So they're just a sort of rainy day fund. This is where we store our money until we need it. It could be in a bank. It could be buried in a coffee can. It could be in the hands of the ultra wealthy, utilizing it as they see fit until it becomes necessary to hand it back over. Not the best policy necessarily, but a policy. In the past, when the wealthiest have been perceived to be insensitive to the plight of the masses, especially when they have appeared to be profiteering from such plights, or have simply been suspected of doing so, society has become unstable, leading to riots, open revolts, and anti-rich violence. Yes, so you understand that to be chopping the heads off of these people, burning their castles down, burning them to death, whatever it takes. But it does lead to societal instability. And so, as we sort of hinted at up top, it's to their benefit. Yes, it's costly to them and they give away a major portion of their wealth, but the end result is the stability that allows them to keep the remainder of their wealth and have a place in which to enjoy it. As history has the unpleasant feature of repeating itself, we would do well to consider recent developments, including legislators' inability to increase taxes on the rich from a long-term perspective. Let us begin with the consideration that the presence of very rich or even super rich individuals has always been somewhat troubling for Western societies. Medieval theologians regarded the rich as sinners and thought that the building of large fortunes should have been discouraged. At the very least, the rich were expected not to appear to be wealthy and to provide generous bequests to charitable institutions to the benefit of their souls. But with time, as new economic opportunities in trade and in finance led to the accumulation of fortunes of unprecedented size, the increased presence of extremely wealthy individuals within the community could no longer be dismissed as an anomaly. From the 15th century, and beginning with the most economically developed areas of Europe, such as central northern Italy, the rich were assigned a specific social role to act as private reserves of money into which the community could tap in times of dire need. Nobody made this point better than the Tuscan humanist Poggio Bracciolini. Have I got that anything close to correct? In his treatise De Avaritia, I guess, on avarice, completed in 1428. That's quite a while ago. He argued that cities that follow the tradition of instituting public granaries to build up food reserves should also be well provided of many greedy individuals in order to constitute a kind of private barn of money, able to be of assistance to everybody. There is abundant historical evidence. It's interesting that it's so openly stated, too, because, of course, now the approach advocated, oddly enough, by the super rich is that no, society has no right to lay their hands on that money. It's theft for them to do so. As opposed to, well, it was always theft for you to be able to withhold all of that money from the rest of us, but we allowed you to do it basically so that there would be large cash reserves that we would know where it is and we would know where to go when it was time to tap it. We would leave some with you afterwards as payment for doing our banking for us, essentially. Don't worry about that. It doesn't mean we need to take every cent that you've got, but that's if you abide by the arrangement. If you don't abide by the arrangement, well then, I guess as I've put it before in the past, the marginal tax rate at the end of a pitchfork is 100%. So you should take a 35, maybe 45% tax rate and call it a win. Anyway. There is abundant historical evidence that for centuries across the West, the rich have dutifully fulfilled their roles as barns of money in a variety of ways, which included accepting to pay exceptional taxes during crises or to provide loans to governments. Often in early modern times, these were technically forced loans to ruling authorities, although the fact that they were not just a prerogative of absolute monarchies, but were also required, usually in wartime, by republican governments, such as that of Venice, should make us wary of considering them mere expression of an arbitrary power. Even in a more democratic type of society, it was still essentially believed at the time, well, yes, society at large has a right to tap those reserves even against the will of the people who ostensibly hold them for us as a barn of money. That's an interesting way of putting it. Not a bank, but a barn of money. Indeed, the rich merchants who were the main, quote, victims of forced loans were also the rulers of patrician republics and understood that they were contributing their private resources to the public good. For example, forced loans were imposed by Venice on its richest citizens after the terrible plague of 1630, as well as to fund an exhausting war with the Ottoman Empire from 1645 to 1669, although on both occasions the Republic was able to raise much greater amounts from its patricians by means of voluntary loans. But again, even there, the voluntary loans, how voluntary are they? Well, you can volunteer to make this loan to us, or, if you don't, we can force you to. Okay, well, in that case, I guess I volunteer. Especially if I volunteer, you need 40% of my holdings. But if you force me to do it, you want 50% of my holdings. I'll take the 40%. That's voluntary. This is not altogether different from the patriotism with which many of the rich subscribed to various emergency loans during the world wars, such as the Liberty Bonds issued in the United States in 1917 and 18 to contribute to funding the Allied war effort. These loans proved to be a poor investment, as the interest tended to become negative in real terms because of hyperinflation. But in the 20th century, as in the 17th, the boundary between free choice and constriction was blurred, as governments welcomed any opportunity to increase the social pressure on those reluctant to contribute. Sometimes they went even further. In Britain, in 1917, the Chancellor of the Exchequer explicitly threatened the nation's financiers with confiscation of company assets, unless specified minimum amounts of capital were raised by a new voluntary war loan. In the 20th century, the real novelty in how the rich were required to step up their wartime contribution was the expansion of progressive taxation. with substantial increases in the top rates of the personal income tax. In the United States, the historical maximum was reached in 1944 and 45 at 94% for incomes over $200,000 and of estate and inheritance taxes. Of course, historically, wars provide the best possible motivation to ask citizens to contribute more, either with their blood or with their cash. But in the 20th century, also during peacetime economic crises, most notably the Great Depression of the 1930s, the rich were expected to contribute considerably more than the general population to foot the bill of public action. For example, this was explicit in the fiscal packages introduced in the United States as part of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. In the past 15 years, we have experienced the Great Recession, which in some countries also led to sovereign debt crises, followed by the worst pandemic in a century or so, by then an ongoing war in Ukraine and the looming threat of large-scale conflict in the Middle East. Based on history, one would expect that in this period, the rich would have been called once again to fulfill their traditional role, and proposals of this kind have entered the political debate in many Western countries. But so far, in most of them, discussion has not been followed by action, and recent fiscal reforms appear to have done little to make the rich contribute more. Recent surveys of fiscal reforms by European countries in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic show that increases in the top rates of the personal income tax, or, where they exist, of wealth taxes, have been rare and modest. In the United States, proposals by the Biden administration to increase taxation for the richest, such as a billionaire minimum income tax, have repeatedly failed to gather sufficient political support. This is troubling because the rich have stopped fulfilling the social role that has been theirs for many centuries, making their position in society somewhat unclear. Why do we have people who are hoarding all the money? Why do we allow that? Well, we just have recently, by tradition. That's it. That's the only answer. We should also consider, related to this, whether the exceptional resilience of the rich to recent crises has been obtained in such a way as to make society as a whole less resilient. I guess part of the inability to raise this funding voluntarily or quasi-voluntarily comes in part from the fact that some people have amassed so much wealth that they don't actually need to stabilize society in order to continue to enjoy it, or at least they don't think that they do, leading to questions by the ultra mega rich, like those we heard about some months ago when they were asking futurists things like, hey, in a post-apocalyptic world where I live in a pleasure bunker underground guarded by a private army, how can I make my private army continue to guard the surface entrances to my underground pleasure dome, even in the face of worldwide catastrophe and my inability to feed or protect them from predatory violence or poison atmospheres or whatever? Why won't they just grab what they can and leave? And the answer was, hey, this isn't what a futurist should be answering questions about. You have a different sort of a question. You need to talk to a political scientist. Anyway, we should consider, it says, whether the exceptional resilience of the rich to recent crises has been obtained in such a way as to make society as a whole less resilient. Different but related question. Is it the case that the rich have checked out of their role in society not only because they can, but has their ability to do so been created, been amassed in a way that has harmed society's ability to maintain its own systems of resilience along the way? For the rich, protecting their fortunes from crises also involves protecting them from extra taxation, thus stripping public institutions of resources that could have been used for stronger mitigation policies, including those aimed at abating the suffering, economic or otherwise, of the poorer strata. In other words, had they been paying their taxes, there would be less need by the rest of the public to, in a crisis situation, strip away the wealth of the ultra-wealthy. They could have protected their assets by surrendering some small portion of them earlier on. To some degree, governments compensated for this by expanding the public debt, which raises the question of who will repay it. Given the fact that many Western fiscal systems do not burden their wealthy to the same degree they once did, it seems probable that the bill for the COVID-19 crisis will weigh on the shoulders of the rich to an extremely low degree relative to the burden during past crises. How could this be, since the public debate across Western countries strongly suggests that in perfect continuity with history, many, including a part of the rich, as shown by the In Tax We Trust campaign, I'm not familiar, considered it rather natural to ask the affluent to contribute more in these exceptional times. Another cultural constant in the history of the West is the widespread suspicion that if the richest components of society become involved directly in politics, they can exert an outsized influence on the political debate. This was clear in the Middle Ages, when across Europe, many Republican city governments tried to prohibit the richest families from gaining access to top public offices, and in the modern age, this suspicion resurfaced regularly. Think of the debate about the growing concentration of economic and financial power in the United States in the first decades of the 20th century, leading to largely bipartisan worries that a few super-rich individuals might have determined the national politics as well. But today, in many Western countries, the political involvement of the very affluent is basically taken for granted. And in some of them, super-rich individuals have even become presidents or prime ministers. Silvio Berlusconi, who became prime minister of Italy in 1994, is an early case. Perhaps the recent attempts to make the rich contribute more during crises have been exceptionally unsuccessful because the rich are so exceptionally well positioned to influence policy making. After all, as affirmed by many of the super rich, in absolute terms, they already pay more taxes than anybody else, an argument that could have come straight from the mouth of a 17th century Venetian patrician, that rhymes, were it not for the fact that the patrician would not have felt compelled to provide any justification for his privileged fiscal treatment. If the rich have been trying to avoid being made to contribute more, then they might not be doing themselves or anybody else any favors. In many Western countries, the electoral success of parties with a clear anti-establishment, anti-rich character most likely arises from widespread anger at an economic and political elite perceived as self-centered and self-serving. Arguably, this is also because the rich have reneged on a centuries-old social contract, shutting the doors to their barns of money. That is interesting, and an interesting historical perspective on all this, and issues that we've touched on along the way about those marginal tax rates at the ends of pitchforks, etc., and the very notion of progressive taxation, that the greater the amount of wealth you hold, and the greater the amount of wealth you hold, and given the tremendous amount of resources that governments and societies in general spend on maintaining the social order that includes, or one might even say has as its main focus, facilitating the ability of people to hold on to their private property, and in particular, huge swaths of it. The richer you are, the more there is to protect in this scheme. The more you have that requires protection from the government, the more you ought to expect to pay to the government in order to maintain that scheme of protection. That's just the basic rationale for progressive taxation. We don't talk about it a great deal, but I guess this puts us in mind of that. And again, it doesn't have to be that way. And it could instead be the order of the day that, there's just some flat cap on the amount of capital people are allowed to amass, and everything else is stripped away and redistributed. That's as legitimate as approach as any of the rest of them. Whether or not it's the most economically beneficial across the board or over the long term, notwithstanding, it is a legitimate choice that could be made. All right. Well, I thought that was an interesting addition to the discussion, and a totally different direction from what we'd been doing up until now. But I'm glad we got it in there. All right. Let's see. Nearing our third break no real opportunity to engage in anything else that's going to take us well into the break. I don't know. Any short items? I'm scanning as we move backwards in time through Pocket here, but I don't think so. All right. We may instead have to essentially, just do a teaser and then come back to the rest of it afterwards. Let's see. Oh, I don't know. There's here's an interesting local story. Perhaps we can save that one. One or two local stories of some interest to add to things here. Maybe here we can double back instead, just before the break, to the other story that Justice was hinting at in the very top of the show. The pardons from Trump. Why not? We'll just do that on our way out the door for the third break. Trump's pardoning of a Kushner-linked drug smuggler. Okay. I didn't even know that's what he was up to. This, according to Business Insider. Lloyd Lee wrote this piece here. Trump's pardoning of a Kushner-linked drug smuggler undercut a larger DOJ investigation. What a shock. We may only have time before the break here for the bullet points and a few segments here. Donald Trump pardoned Jonathan Braun. Is it Braun or Brown? B-R-A-U-N. You know, we've got the senator who spells his name that way and says Brown, essentially. A convicted drug smuggler. The pardon came on his last day in office, as was frequently the case. Meanwhile, the DOJ hoped to use Brown, this guy, in a separate probe into the predatory lending business. Not just drug dealing, but also predatory lending. What a champ. Braun's commutation meant the DOJ lost its leverage with him. They couldn't get him to cooperate.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. How would you like to hear more about this wackadoodle who got himself a pardon? Why not? It's amazing what happens out there for certain segments of society, maybe the super rich, like we were just discussing. Here's the story. Brown, whatever his name is, was convicted of drug smuggling in 2011. But a law enforcement official told the Times, under the condition of anonymity, that, and are we talking about the New York Times here? Did we, yeah, there we are. Right. Oh, I think we skipped down past the bullet points here. We missed the opening couple of paragraphs here. Donald Trump's pardoning of a convicted marijuana smuggler. How ancient is that? With ties to the Kushner family, threw a wrench in a Justice Department's larger probe into the predatory lending industry, the New York Times reported. Right, okay. On his last day in office, Trump pardoned Jonathan Braun, a Staten Island resident who at the time was serving a 10-year prison sentence for money laundering and running an international marijuana smuggling ring. I guess the money laundering to cover up the dollars taken in by the drug smuggling. Braun's pardon came while Trump's Justice Department was working out its own deal with Braun to fast-track his sentence in exchange for his cooperation with a separate DOJ probe into the predatory lending or merchant cash advance industry. In this merchant cash advance business, lenders offer cash-strapped borrowers, such as small businesses, financing with high interest rates and fees. These terms can often leave borrowers in a vicious cycle of debt. Braun was convicted of drug smuggling in 2011, but a law enforcement official told the Times under condition of anonymity that Braun was released from jail after a year and a half as part of a plea deal to cooperate with investigations into other high-profile drug smugglers. So, okay, sentenced to 10 years for drug smuggling, which, of course, Donald Trump said you should be immediately executed for, right, when it's other people. But if you know Jared Kushner, we let you out of jail. But he got let out of jail after a year and a half of his 10-year sentence with the idea that he would help out the DOJ in investigating other drug smugglers, which might or might not be worth it. We never know. Although he was placed under house arrest, Braun was largely able to live as a free man for reasons still unknown. We just don't know really why. We just let him out of jail instead. He spent nearly the next decade leading a predatory lending operation as a principal of Richmond Capital Group, prosecutors said in court documents seen by Business Insider. Prosecutors accused Braun of harassing and sending threats to his clients. Braun, for example, told one merchant not to F with him. And he uses the real word here, of course. The real word, look out. And threatened, I know where you live. I know where your mother lives, prosecutors said. So, legitimate businessman, essentially. In 8 years, Braun advanced about $80 million, targeting desperate small business owners and setting interest rates often higher than 1,000% yearly, Bloomberg reported. This all while he was supposed to be helping the DOJ find other drug dealers and had been let out of his own drug smuggling sentence. In a telephone interview with the Times, Braun denied any wrongdoing as a lender. Years after his 2011 drug smuggling conviction, Braun was sentenced to 10 years in a New York prison despite cooperating with investigators. He began his sentence in 2020, according to the New York Attorney General. But Braun's hand in the lending industry made him a valuable asset to the Justice Department since the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan was investigating a wider predatory lending business, the Times reported. With Braun's experience, the DOJ hoped to cut out a deal with the convicted smuggler by commuting his sentence in exchange for providing information on other predatory lenders and possibly wearing a wire, the Times reported. So again, he's going to be let out for help because he's a criminal in two different areas. First time we let him out for help, we asked him for help with drug smugglers, and he didn't provide it. So we ended up having to send him back to jail again. But now we're thinking, let's cut another deal with him instead. This time he'll tell us about the predatory lending business, which is what he was doing when we let him out of jail last time. And apparently they've let him out of jail to do that and then pardoned him. And guess what? He hasn't been any help with the predatory lending investigation either. What a surprise. I can't believe that this is happening. All right, that deal would fall apart, though, after Trump pardoned Braun in January of 2021. Key to gaining his clemency, the Times reported, was Braun's connection to the family of Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump's husband and senior White House advisor during the Trump administration. Braun was a member of the inaugural class of the Kushner Yeshiva High School in Livingston, New Jersey, which the Kushner family funded, the report said. As a member of the first freshman class, Braun was classmates with Jared Kushner's youngest sister, Nicole, the Times reported. One merchant cash advance dealer told the Times that Braun's cousin, Isaac Wolf, told him Braun's father sought help from Kushner's father, Charles, to secure a pardon. Charles, of course, himself a convict, later pardoned. What do you know? But hey, they just pass pardons around among themselves. On his last day in office, Trump pardoned Braun, releasing a statement that misspelled Braun's first name, not his last name, but his first name, despite calling for drug dealers to receive the death penalty a year later at a Pennsylvania rally. Every pardon application went through a vigorous vetting and review process overseen by the pardon attorney and various White House departments, although they really did not, including the counsel's office. A Trump spokesperson said in an email to Insider, President Trump acted upon their recommendations that were based off each individual's circumstances. I mean, it should be noted that they've already published several stories noting that no, the pardon attorney didn't hear about the vast majority of the pardons that Trump signed on the last day in office. So why that's not noted here, I do not know. The Braun family, as it happens, also retained Alan Dershowitz, a member of Trump's legal counsel during the impeachment proceedings in 2020. Dershowitz told the Times that Braun's father regularly called him, saying he was so upset my son is still in prison, and asked what the attorney could do to help. The lawyer told the publication he could not recall what he did for Braun. Never can. Isn't that interesting? But that his involvement could just have been a phone call. I believe God made it happen for me because I'm a good person and I was treated unfairly, Braun told the Times, adding that his supporters sought several avenues to get him out of prison. A spokesperson for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan could not be reached for comment during the weekend. Well, he believes he's a good person, though. He just calls people and threatens them and tells them, I know where your mother lives, because of how good he is. All right, well, you didn't need to know any more about how awful Trump's circle is, but it's a story, and it's in the news today, and I think, all right, we ought to at least acknowledge it. Who knows what it'll blow up into in the next couple of days. All right, how about this one? Totally weird. Why not throw this one in there as a unconnected, esoteric, weird story? Who knows what it'll turn into. Local, a Pennsylvania story, Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Uh-oh, wait a second. We might have to read this one in pocket. But let me reload this thing to make sure I can get the author name correct. Oh, it's not even going to let me do it. So we'll just use the pocket version and guess that Maddie Hanna is the writer here for the Philadelphia Inquirer, story taking place in Downingtown. However, a Downingtown school board candidate, sounds ominous already, pretended to be the Society of College Medicine. Why? No one knows why they chose that, but the idea was to use that as cover to challenge books, i.e. to have them banned from the public library. How do you like that? That's an interesting and innovative way of doing things. The first warning from the Society of College Medicine, whatever that might have been pretending to be, landed in inboxes in June 2021 with the subject line, violation, book red flagged. Got it? Okay. It has come to our attention that a, quote, red flagged book has appeared in your DEI reading list. The email to Downingtown area school district administrators and school board members began, citing White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. We recommend this being removed immediately and sensitivity counseling / training administered to whomever recommended / allowed this book to a school population, said the email, which didn't have a name attached to it, but was signed by the Society's Violations Department, which really obviously should have screamed fraud right away, but let alone the idea that it would be from the Society of College Medicine. I mean, if you were going to answer anything at all, it would have been, well, one, show up at a meeting and come and tell us this face to face. Love to see who you are. And two, what do we care what the Society of College Medicine has to say about anything? We're not a college, and we don't teach medicine, so get lost. Several more emails arrived in the coming weeks, warning Downingtown that the society had now issued 5 Tier 1 and 8 Tier 2 violations for books it deemed extremely divisive. The society said it had given Downingtown's DEI reading list a D, which is the bottom tier of all schools we assess globally. It's clever that he makes it look like a wider operation. But the Society for College Medicine is merely a website that appears to be made up by a man who is not a physician, but is running for the Downingtown School Board. Christopher Bressi, a Republican backed by the conservative parental rights group Moms for Liberty, previously listed the society on his resume and referenced it in Facebook posts. According to community members who've documented the ties, the society's website also has mentioned Bressi. It's one of numerous websites he appears to have created that link to one another and profess to be global networks of academic professionals. When Bressi announced his candidacy, community members searched online to learn more about him. They found a resume on LinkedIn that mentioned the Society of College Medicine, the first of several connections that would emerge. The mention has since disappeared from his resume, which also doesn't use his full name, which is an odd thing not to have on your resume, don't you think? Should be a red flag in itself. But I mean, I guess essentially this guy started this as resume inflation more than anything else, and then I guess put it to use for his preferred political activity as well. Why would this person, who has been acting so underhandedly to target our school district, now want to be on the school board? That's a concern, said one parent. It's easy to figure out. But I mean, it is a concern, yes, but I think you could probably answer that question. He wanted power. Well, anyway, and probably a paycheck. That's a concern, said one parent who, like several interviewed, asked to remain anonymous, fearing harassment and threats from other community members on behalf of this guy, which is amazing. Bressi did not respond to requests for comment, but in a Facebook post in March, he said he had never wanted to run for school board, really, which used to be the most trivial position on planet Earth, but was convinced to after 5 requests. Wow, 5. He said in that post that since announcing his run, he had been harassed, bullied, and doxxed, and that his opponents were afraid he would bring rationality back and actually listen to parents. The Society of College Medicine website does not claim to be anything to do or have anything to do with medicine. That's interesting. Instead, billing itself as a school safety and preparedness network with current members and alumni from virtually every college and or university in America and beyond. But its content consists entirely of links to colleges, to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's website, and to other websites affiliated with Bressi. As of Wednesday, after the Inquirer reached out for comment, the list of member colleges was deleted, because of course there weren't any. Bressi describes himself as a professor, appearing on Moms for Liberty's endorsement list as Professor Christopher Bressi, who began working in the, quote, higher education sector as a research assistant in 1998. Since those humbler beginnings, I have held various senior-level positions, including academic dean, department chair, site director, director of education, and national director, he says on his campaign website. He doesn't say where he's worked, but a LinkedIn resume for Christopher B. on LinkedIn that uses the same Martin Luther King Jr. quote as his campaign site, that being, everybody can be great because anybody can serve, lists numerous positions, including executive director of higher education. Where? Just nowhere. That position appears to be with, they associated it with something. Aspect Consulting, executive director of higher education, an IT consulting company based in King of Prussia. The company did not return a message seeking comment. A former colleague said Bressi's role when they worked together was connecting education institutions with consultants that could advise them about software. Why is that even a job? Just Google consultants who can advise us about software. The fact that he says he's the director of higher ed, that's a service we provide, but he's not the service, he's the go-between, said the former colleague who spoke on the condition of anonymity. Bressi's resume also said he had been an adjunct technology professor with Delaware County Community College for 20 years. A college spokesperson said she could not comment on employment information, which is, I guess, how people get away with this sort of nonsense. In other roles, Bressi said he worked as a technology professor for ITT Technical Institute, the for-profit education chain that shut down in 2016, and as academic dean for the former Career Education Corporation, now how do you say that? PERDOCEO. Not CEO like the executive, but Perdocio? I don't know. I've never heard of it. A company that owns for-profit colleges. The company did not respond to a request for comment. I would have just asked them how to pronounce their name. He also says he was a law and justice professor from 2004 to 2006 for Alvernia University in the Philadelphia and Exton, Pennsylvania locations. Bressi says that as site director and professor for the Pennsylvania Institute of Forensic Science, he worked in conjunction with Alvernia College to expand/open a satellite campus in Exton, Pennsylvania. An Alvernia spokesperson said academic records reflect classes taught by Bressi in 2005, but we haven't operated a site in Exton. It's unclear what the Pennsylvania Institute of Forensic Science is. It doesn't appear in Google searches. An earlier version of Bressi's resume described the Society of College Medicine as formed from that institute. While Democrats control the Downingtown School Board currently, Republicans have in the past. As in other suburban districts, partisan tensions erupted during the pandemic. People are still calling me an abuser for supporting masking, said Audrey Blust, a retired teacher and Democrat running against Bressi for re-election. Compared with when she first ran 4 years ago, Blust said misinformation abounds and Republicans act as though we're doing something nefarious. The email sent by the society came as a group of Downingtown parents were attacking the district's diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives as critical race theory, an academic framework examining systemic racism that had suddenly become a target of the right nationally. Bressi began commenting on Facebook about the bigotry of CRT, according to screenshots taken by community members. In a No Left Turn in Education group, Bressi, using the name Christopher Bree, B-R-E, shared an email from the Society for College Medicine notifying Downingtown of red flag violations and referred to pressure from the Society of College Medicine that he suggested was having an impact. But district administrators had already disregarded the messages. There is no Society of College Medicine, let alone a violations department. Justin Brown, Downingtown's director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, wrote in an email to school board members. Glad he got that right. This is simply someone trying to troll the district. The society emailed administrators again in December of 2022, objecting to plans for students to attend an Alice in Wonderland pantomime play at the People's Light and Theater Company in Malvern that featured a drag performer as the Cheshire Cat, sparking controversy among some parents. As you can imagine, we strongly frown on the notion of using academic time/hours to encourage attendance of obviously politically motivated and highly charged shows/rallies/events. Rallies. Read the email, again, signed by the Violations Department. Bressi's role in the Society of College Medicine is apparent from reviewing other sites such as Space Tourism Magazine, which does not appear to be a magazine, but says it partners with, quote, most major space tourism providers, unquote, and can negotiate the best pricing possible for trips to space. This website was taken down as of Wednesday night. That site said it's a division of Bressi LLC, which Bressi describes as a diversified holding company focusing on the craft, food, and beverage sectors, as well as STEM/STEAM sectors. 'Cause why not? A LinkedIn page for Bressi LLC lists an address that corresponds to an Italian grocery store in Culpmont in Northumberland County. Okay. Both the Space Tourism and Society of College Medicine sites linked to, quote, our flagship academic network, unquote, a LinkedIn group titled Global Education Executives, parentheses, no politics in school, Global Academic Network, exclamation point. That group said it was managed by societyofcollegemedicine.com. So just a interlocking directorate of made-up garbage by Bressi that he just, used to pretend he was speaking for groups of people and to inflate his own resume. Bressi referred to that LinkedIn group while addressing the Downingtown board in March 2022, opposing a contract with the American School Counselor Association that he said would promote divisive ideologies. Bressie informed the board that the largest educational management group on LinkedIn had recommended collectively that K-12 schools adopt a no politics in the classroom pledge, advising the district to follow suit. Bressie's use of groups he's created is absolutely deceptive, intended to convey authority, said one parent who requested anonymity because she's been secretly tracking right-wing community members online. She said she worries about the prospect of Moms for Liberty and others gaining influence on the school board. I don't want my hometown to end up like Florida. Dun, dun, dun. There's the specter of Florida for you. Interesting story. I don't know. It doesn't seem to be connected in any particular way to, directly to other activities in other areas. It's just sort of a warning once again that take nothing for granted and take nothing at face value. Always check everyone's credentials, like Trump and paperwork. It may turn out, if it strikes you as odd that the Society of College Medicine wants anything to do with your book list, it's probably because the whole thing is fake. If you haven't heard of it before, although now you've heard of the Society of College Medicine, but you get the idea. Check the references. Always check the references. And of course, reporters should always be calling places on everybody's resume asking, did they really work there? That's just got to be done. Anyway, amazing that it would happen again. All right, let's see. What other things we want to share with you in the few minutes we have remaining? We were all the way down the list of backlogged pocket stories. Let's see, this one was right nearby, and we ended up having to click through in order to read the thing. And so, let's see, we missed out on, oh yeah, you know what? Why not try this one? This is something that Greg was hinting at a little bit as well, and might be wise to share with everybody. Can I share this one? Or is this behind a paywall too? Partially behind a paywall anyway. Miles Klee for Rolling Stone noting this trend. And I guess if you find yourself more frustrated than usual, inordinately frustrated with people who have, oddly outlandish things to say either about what's going on in Israel and Gaza, or about perhaps how they will react at the American ballot box as a result of these things, always keep this in mind. Verified hate speech accounts are pivoting to Palestine for clout and cash, says Miles over at Rolling Stone. Back on November 1st, but we're finally getting to it now. Probably should have done it earlier. The weeks-long Israeli assault on Gaza in response to a deadly surprise attack by Hamas militants on October 7th has already cost thousands of lives, and the bloodshed will only continue as a ground invasion gets underway. This is an older article, remember that. But thousands of miles distant, paid clout chasers on X, formerly Twitter, are using the conflict to boost their profiles, and a few who have successfully pivoted to pro-Palestine content were formerly known for hate speech, extremism, and conspiracy theories. Some may also be gaming social media algorithms through viral misinformation and reckless sharing of graphic imagery. These aggressive strategies have led unsuspecting users seeking up-to-date context on the war, particularly narratives that challenge official statements from the U.S. and Israel, to interact with and amplify potentially harmful accounts. The influencers, in turn, may reap higher creator payouts from X. An account called Censored Men, which you should always stay away from, for example, on Tuesday, way back when, posted about an Israeli airstrike on the Jabalia refugee camp in North Gaza in the clinical tone you might expect from a newswire service. But the post appeared to inflate the number of casualties. Hundreds of civilians have been killed and hundreds more have been injured, read the tweet, whereas the initial death toll reported by the Palestinian medics was 50. It was bad enough all by itself, but the same post included a video of a young man grieving over a dead body. The tweet has thousands of likes and many replies from other blue checkmark accounts. Impressions from these users are the engagement metric by which creators on the platform are paid. You can also buy a premium subscription to Censored Men for $3 a month. But it doesn't sound like a thing you'd want to be caught subscribing to, quite honestly, but okay. But why, you might ask, is an X feed promoting pro-Palestine content and criticism of Israel called censored men. Well, it's because the account, launched in December of 2022, was originally used largely to protest the innocence of misogynist manosphere figure Andrew Tate and his brother Tristan, who were detained in Romania that month and later charged with rape and human trafficking. Many early posts sought to discredit the Tate's alleged victims, while others condemned the LGBTQ agenda, demonizing drag performers and transgender people. The users even complained in February of being temporarily suspended for such posts. An analysis published recently by the University of Washington Center for an Informed Public found Censored Men has become one of 7 accounts wielding disproportionate power and influence over Israel-Hamas news on X. The account, which has more than tripled in size to 683,000 since this July, has from its inception regularly retweeted Suleiman Ahmed, a UK graduate student. Ahmed has similarly supported the Tates, arguing that they were framed, and posted transphobic content while stoking fears of LGBTQ grooming of children. Also, like Censored Men, Ahmed has lately taken to sharing repetitive, non-stop updates about the devastation in Gaza, many of them questionable. His posts Tuesday about the Jabalia airstrike declared 500 killed and injured, far more than the official estimate given by medical personnel on the ground, but just one was flagged with a community notes correction. In September, Ahmed had 88,000 followers, a number that has more than doubled to 206,000 since the Israel-Hamas war began. You getting the idea? There's more to the article. We'll share it with you, but that's the idea. Something to keep in mind. Doesn't necessarily by any means mean that everybody that you encounter who is from whatever side is who they say they are or is doing what they say they're doing. But an interesting trend to keep an eye out on, and very obviously, I think, an overt policy, an overt strategy to find common ground with people that might otherwise recognize the agenda and want nothing to do with these accounts, and instead gain their trust by pretending to share common ground with them on Israel, Gaza, Hamas situation, only to what? At some point perhaps turn the tables, pull the rug out from under them, or subtly, slowly bring them along with other content along the way if they in fact gain their trust. So something to be aware of, something to look out for. Speaking of something to look out for, or say something to look forward to, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes up next. Justice Putnam bringing you his program next right here on Netroots Radio. Here's what's on tap for today. A New York Times opinion piece written by conservative lawyers and scholars sounds the alarm about the threat of a second Trump administration, everybody's new hobby these days. On the rest of the menu, frazzled parents are celebrating that schools in Portland, Oregon reached a tentative deal with the teachers union after a nearly month-long strike. That sounds like good news. And of course, there's more from around the country and around the world.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Uh-oh, here's trouble. Authorities evacuated over several hundred people after a petroleum refinery explosion near Detroit. Hadn't heard about that one. And federal appeals court ruled that Georgia can keep statewide elections for its 5-member commission regulating utilities, overturning an earlier ruling stating that statewide elections illegally diluted black votes. Stay tuned.